The hyperspace tunnel collapsed with a sound like breaking glass mixed with thunder. David Reynolds felt his stomach drop as the Wanderer tumbled back into normal space, emergency lights flashing red across the control room. His crew of 200 had been heading home to Earth after a routine mineral survey mission when their navigation computer decided to have what Rita Walsh, their chief engineer, called a mechanical nervous breakdown. "Well, that's not good," Tom Brady muttered from his navigator's seat, staring at readings that made no sense. The stars outside looked wrong. Actually, everything looked wrong. Instead of the familiar empty void they expected, massive shapes hung in space around them like sleeping giants. Amy Foster pressed her face against the observation window, her breath fogging the glass. "Those aren't asteroids," she whispered. The xenobiologist had studied every known space phenomenon, but nothing in her textbooks looked like the enormous metallic structures surrounding their ship. "Ships," Robert Stone announced from his security station. "Hundreds of them. Some are bigger than our entire space station back home." His voice stayed calm, but David noticed his hand moving toward the emergency communications button. The alien vessels formed perfect geometric patterns, their surfaces gleaming with lights that pulsed in synchronized waves. Each ship looked different from the others, as if designed by completely separate civilizations. Some curved like seashells, others stood sharp and angular like crystal formations. A few seemed to be made of pure energy, shifting and flowing like captured lightning. Rita's engineering console started beeping frantically. "We're being scanned," she reported, her fingers flying over the controls. "Multiple energy signatures. Technologies I've never seen before. It's like they're taking our ship apart piece by piece without touching us." David opened his mouth to give orders, but stopped when a new ship appeared directly in front of them. This one dwarfed all the others, stretching so far in both directions that he couldn't see where it ended. Its hull was dark red with golden markings that seemed to move and shift when he looked at them too long. "Incoming transmission," Tom announced. "Audio and visual. Should I put it through?" Before David could answer, the main screen flickered to life. A face appeared that made Amy gasp out loud. The being looked like a lizard that had learned to walk upright and wear military uniforms. Scales covered its elongated head, and its eyes glowed yellow in the dim light of its ship's bridge. "Unknown. Vessel." The creature spoke in perfect English, though its voice carried a hissing quality that made each word sound like a threat. "You have entered the territory of the Galactic Dominion without permission. Identify yourselves immediately." David cleared his throat and stepped forward. "This is Captain David Reynolds of the exploration vessel Wanderer, representing Earth. We seem to have had a navigation malfunction. We're not entirely sure where we are, to be honest." The lizard being's head tilted to one side, as if David had just said something in a language it didn't understand. "You claim ignorance of the Dominion? Impossible. All civilized species know of our empire." "Well, we're probably not all that civilized by your standards," David admitted with a shrug. "We've only had space travel for about 60 years, and we've never traveled this far from home before. Could you possibly point us toward the nearest navigation beacon? We'd be happy to pay any fines for accidentally entering your space." The alien's yellow eyes widened. Behind it, David could see other creatures moving around what looked like a military command center. Some appeared to be made of living crystal, others looked like giant insects walking on their hind legs. One seemed to be nothing but colored, light held together in a roughly humanoid shape. "Fines?" the lizard repeated slowly. "You speak of fines when you face the might of Admiral Corvus and the Dominion's Third Fleet?" Amy stepped up beside David, pulling out a small notebook. "Admiral Corvus, is it? I'm Dr. Amy Foster, xenobiologist. This is fascinating. Are you the primary species in this region or part of a larger governmental structure? And forgive me for asking, but what's your preferred method of diplomatic contact? We want to make sure we follow proper protocol." The Admiral's mouth opened and closed several times without sound coming out. The other aliens on the bridge had stopped what they were doing and were staring at the screen. Rita leaned over Tom's shoulder to peer at the transmission. "Nice ship you've got there, Admiral. Is that a plasma drive system? The energy output readings are impressive. Must cost a fortune to maintain, though." "You will surrender your vessel immediately," Admiral Corvus finally managed to say, his voice rising to what might have been a roar. "Resistance is futile. Your ship will be boarded and your crew processed according to Dominion law." "Processed how, exactly?" Robert asked, stepping into view. "Are we talking about immigration paperwork or something more serious? Because if there are legal procedures we need to follow, we'd appreciate a list of requirements. We've got some experience with bureaucracy." David nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We're happy to comply with local regulations. Is there a fee schedule we should look at? And do you accept Earth currency, or do we need to exchange it first?" The screen flickered as Admiral Corvus seemed to have some kind of discussion with his crew. When the image stabilized, his expression had changed from threatening to confused. "You will be escorted to the flagship of Emperor Thrax," he announced. "Do not attempt to flee or resist. The consequences would be severe." "Emperor Thrax," Amy repeated, writing in her notebook. "Is he available for a brief meeting? We'd love to present our credentials and discuss establishing formal relations between our species." The transmission cut off abruptly. Outside the Wanderer, dozens of the alien ships began moving into formation around them. Beams of light reached out from the largest vessels, gently pulling the human ship along like invisible ropes. "Well," Tom said, checking his instruments. "They seem friendly enough. A bit formal maybe, but at least they're not shooting at us." Rita was already pulling up diagnostic screens. "I want to get a good look at their technology while we're here. This could be the scientific discovery of the century." "Discovery of several centuries," Amy corrected, still scribbling notes. "Did you see the diversity of species on that bridge? This isn't just first contact. This is first contact with an entire galactic community." David watched the alien ships guide them deeper into the formation. "Let's just try not to cause any diplomatic incidents. We're representing all of humanity. Here." "How hard could it be?" Robert asked with a grin. "We'll just be polite, follow their rules, and try not to break anything important." None of them realized that the Galactic Dominion had never encountered a species that treated invasion, fleets like welcome wagons, or that their polite compliance was about to cause the biggest diplomatic crisis in galactic history. The docking bay doors opened with a deep rumble that shook the Wanderer from bow to stern. David Reynolds straightened his uniform and checked that his small diplomatic team was ready. Amy Foster clutched her xenobiology equipment like a child, with new toys, while Tom Brady had somehow managed to stuff a measuring tape into his pocket. Robert Stone looked relaxed, but David noticed he kept his hands free and his eyes moving. "Remember," David said quietly as they walked down the ramp. "We're guests here. Let's act like it." The first thing that hit them was the smell. Not bad exactly, but strange, like ozone mixed with something floral and a hint of metal. The second thing was the size. The docking bay stretched so far in every direction that David couldn't see the walls. Ships of every imaginable design floated in organized rows, held in place by beams of colored light. "Incredible," Tom whispered, already pulling out his measuring tape. "This place could hold 1,000 ships our size." Their escort waited at the bottom of the ramp. Admiral Corvus looked even more impressive in person, standing nearly 8 feet tall in ornate military armor that gleamed like polished copper. Behind him stood a dozen other beings that made David's head spin just looking at them. One appeared, to be made entirely of living crystal, its faceted surface reflecting rainbow patterns with each movement. Another looked like a praying mantis that had grown to human size and learned to wear clothing. A third seemed to be constructed from stars and nebulae, its form shifting between solid and gaseous states. "Follow," Admiral Corvus commanded, turning sharply on his heel. "Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not deviate from the designated path." "Got it," David said pleasantly. "Though I have to ask, is photography allowed? This is remarkable architecture." The Admiral's head snapped around so fast that David heard his neck scales clicking together. "Photography?" Amy had already pulled out a small camera and was taking pictures of the ceiling. "The engineering is fascinating," she explained to no one in particular. "The load distribution patterns suggest a completely different understanding of structural dynamics. And these light sources, are they organic or technological?" "Organic, technological hybrid," the crystal being answered automatically, then seemed surprised by its own response. "Really?" Amy's eyes lit up. "That's incredible. We theorized about biotech integration but never achieved stable implementation. What's the power source? And how do you prevent rejection between the organic and synthetic components?" The crystal being opened what might have been a mouth, then closed it again. Admiral Corvus made a sound like steam escaping from a radiator. "Silence," he hissed. "You will observe proper protocols." "Of course," Robert agreed. "What are the proper protocols?" "We want to make sure we don't accidentally violate any customs." They walked through corridors that seemed designed by committee, if the committee had been made up of artists from 12 different planets who had never met each other. The walls curved and straightened seemingly at random, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Some sections pulsed with bioluminescent life, others displayed scrolling text in languages that made David's eyes water. "How do you navigate? In here?" Tom asked, genuinely curious. "Do you use maps, or is there some kind of internal guidance system?" "The ship's consciousness provides direction," one of the escorts answered before Admiral Corvus could stop it. "Ship's consciousness," Tom repeated, nodding as if that made perfect sense. "AI integration or actual artificial sentience? And how? Do you handle conflicting priorities between ship systems and crew requirements?" Admiral Corvus was making more steam radiator noises. "You will cease this interrogation immediately." "Oh, we're not interrogating," Amy assured him brightly. "We're just curious. This is all so fascinating. Do you mind if I ask about your species' evolutionary history? The scale patterns suggest a reptilian base, but the bone structure looks almost mammalian." "I am Saurid," Admiral Corvus said stiffly. "We are warriors born." "Warriors born," Amy repeated, scribbling in her notebook. "Is that a cultural designation or biological? And how does that interact with your role in what appears to be a multi-species governmental structure?" The Admiral stopped walking entirely. The entire escort party bunched up behind him like cars in a traffic jam. "You ask many questions for prisoners." "Are we prisoners?" David asked mildly. "I thought we were visitors. If we're under arrest, we should probably know what the charges are. We might need to contact our embassy, though I don't think we have." "One yet, embassy," the mantis-like being repeated in a voice like wind chimes. "You speak of embassies as if you are equals." "Well, we're probably not equals," David admitted. "You've clearly got more advanced technology and a much larger territory. But we're independent representatives of our species, so embassy seems like the right term." They entered what could only be described as a throne room, though it looked more like the inside of a kaleidoscope having an argument with a cathedral. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, covered in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Pillars that seemed to be carved from single massive gems supported galleries filled with dozens of different alien species, all watching the humans, with expressions that ranged from curiosity to hostility. At the far end of the room, on a throne that appeared to be grown rather than built, sat something that made David's brain hiccup just trying to process it. The being was roughly humanoid, but seemed to be constructed from living geometry, its form constantly shifting between different crystalline configurations. Light poured from its body in waves, casting rainbow shadows across the floor. "Behold, Emperor Thrax," Admiral Corvus announced, his voice carrying across the vast space. ruler of 12 species, commander of 1,000 worlds, master of the Galactic Dominion. Impressive, David said, and meant it. Your Majesty, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Captain David Reynolds, representing Earth and humanity. We're very grateful for your hospitality. The Emperor's form stabilized into something roughly humanoid, though light continued to pour from what might have been eyes. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, like stereo speakers, built into reality itself. You stand before the throne of dominion, small beings. Your species is unknown, your technology primitive, your ship pathetic. Yet you do not tremble, you do not beg, you do not even seem properly afraid. Tom was measuring the distance between pillars with his eyes, clearly estimating the room's dimensions. Amy was taking notes on the Emperor's bioluminescent properties. Robert was scanning the exits and guard positions out of professional habit. Should we be afraid? David asked honestly. You seem reasonable enough. A bit formal maybe, but we're used to that. Government officials tend towards ceremony. Government officials, Emperor Thrax repeated slowly. You compare the Eternal Throne to government officials? Well, you are governing, Amy pointed out. Multi-species coordination, territorial management, law enforcement. It's basically government on a galactic scale. Very impressive government, but still government. A sound rippled through the throne room that might have been gasps from a dozen. Different species. Emperor Thrax's light flickered like a candle in wind. We have protocols for conquest, he said, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. We have protocols for surrender. We have protocols for rebellion. We do not have protocols for whatever this is. This is called diplomacy, David said helpfully. Usually starts with exchanging credentials and establishing mutual interests. Do you have a State Department? Or someone who handles foreign relations? Foreign relations, Emperor Thrax repeated faintly. You know, species-to-species communication, trade agreements, territorial boundaries, cultural exchanges, Tom added. Standard diplomatic stuff. The Emperor's form began shifting rapidly between different geometric configurations, light pouring from him in increasingly chaotic patterns. Remove them, he commanded finally. Take them to the processing center. I need to consult the archives. As the escorts led them away, David heard Amy ask Admiral Corvus, Processing center? Is that like customs? Because we should probably declare the scientific equipment we brought. We don't want to cause any problems with import regulations. The steam radiator sound Admiral Corvus made this time was loud enough to echo off the crystalline ceiling. The processing center looked like what would happen if someone tried to build a government office inside a fever dream. Desks floated at random heights throughout a space that seemed to ignore basic geometry, while filing cabinets grew from the walls like metallic trees. Alien bureaucrats of every conceivable shape and size hunched over paperwork that glowed, moved, or occasionally tried to escape. David Reynolds and his team sat in chairs that had molded themselves to their bodies, facing a being that looked like an octopus wearing a business suit. The nameplate on its desk read, Deputy Assistant Undersecretary Vex, in symbols that somehow translated themselves inside their heads. Let me understand this correctly, Vex said, its tentacles shuffling, through forms that seemed to write themselves. You claim to represent an entire species, but you have no territorial conquest record, no subjugation documentation, and no proof of military superiority? That's right, David confirmed. We've never conquered anyone. We just explore and try to make friends. Three of Vex's eyes focused on David while the others continued reading paperwork. Make friends? This is not a recognized category of interstellar contact. Amy Foster leaned forward eagerly. What categories do you recognize? We'd love to learn about your diplomatic framework. Vex's tentacles paused their shuffling. Diplomatic framework? You mean conquest protocols? There are 17 standard procedures: total annihilation, complete subjugation, tribute collection, resource extraction, slave labor acquisition, territory absorption, cultural elimination. Those all sound rather unpleasant, Tom Brady interrupted. Don't you have anything for, well, just talking? Mutual cooperation? Scientific exchange? Scientific exchange, Vex repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. You wish to share knowledge voluntarily? Of course, Amy said, pulling out her notebook. That's how science works best. We share our discoveries, you share. Yours, everyone learns faster. It's called collaborative research. Vex began making sounds like a coffee machine having an existential crisis. This is irregular. I must consult Form 847B, Protocols for Unprecedented Situations. While Vex rummaged through floating filing cabinets, Robert Stone watched the other beings in the processing center. Most looked deeply unhappy, huddled in corners, or arguing with bureaucrats who seemed to take pleasure in denying their requests. Busy place, he observed. How many species do you process through here? Currently, we are managing subjugation protocols for 47 species across this sector, Vex answered absently, still searching for forms. Though 3 are proving problematic. The spiral people keep folding themselves into dimensions we cannot access. The living crystals refuse to acknowledge our authority on philosophical grounds, and the energy dancers claim we do not technically exist. That does sound challenging, David agreed sympathetically. Have you considered mediation services? Vex's head tentacle snapped toward David. Mediation services? You know, neutral third-party intervention to resolve conflicts, Tom explained. We use it all the time for trade disputes and territorial disagreements. Trade disputes, Vex said. Weakly, Rita Walsh, who had been quietly examining the floating furniture, suddenly spoke up. Your energy distribution system has some serious safety issues. These floating desks are drawing power through unstable field generators. Someone could get hurt. She pointed to a filing cabinet that was sparking ominously. See? That's a cascade. Failure waiting to happen. You need better insulation on those power conduits. Vex's eyes followed Rita's pointing finger, then widened in what might have been alarm. The filing system has been malfunctioning for decades. Our technicians claim it is unfixable. Unfixable? Rita snorted. It's just a matter of proper field alignment. You want me to take a look? Before Vex could answer, Rita was already pulling tools from her belt and approaching the sparking cabinet. She opened a panel, studied the contents for a moment, then made 3 quick adjustments. The sparking stopped, and the cabinet's erratic floating stabilized into a smooth hover. There, Rita said, closing the panel. Should work fine now. Though, you really ought to schedule regular maintenance on these things. Vex stared at the now properly functioning filing cabinet as if it had just performed a miracle. You fixed it. Without authorization, without proper clearance, without filing a work order. Well, it was dangerous, Rita said reasonably. And it only took a minute. Amy was meanwhile examining the forms Vex had scattered across the desk. These are fascinating. Your administrative structure is incredibly complex, though I notice you don't have any forms for voluntary cooperation agreements. Because they do not exist, Vex said firmly. Species either submit to the Dominion or are forced to submit. There is no third option. There could be, David suggested. We could help you draft some new forms, mutual cooperation agreements, scientific exchange protocols, cultural ambassador guidelines. You wish to help us create paperwork to process. Yourselves, Vex asked incredulously. Why not? Tom said with a shrug. We're good at paperwork. Had to fill out about 3,000 forms just to get approval for this mission. One of Vex's tentacles started twitching uncontrollably. This is highly irregular. I must consult with my supervisor. Of course, David said politely. Take your Time. While Vex huddled over a communication device that looked like a conch shell made of metal, Amy noticed another alien at a nearby desk struggling with a stack of forms that kept trying to escape. The being looked like a cross between a seahorse and a telescope, with multiple eye stalks and fins that it was using to pin down paperwork. "Need help?" Amy asked, walking over, the seahorse telescope being looked up gratefully. "These forms are for establishing trade relationships with conquered territories. But my people are not conquered. We joined the Dominion voluntarily 3 centuries ago. There are no appropriate forms for voluntary members." "That's a problem we might be able to solve," Amy said thoughtfully. "What kind of trade relationships are you trying to establish?" Within minutes, Amy had helped the being organize its paperwork into a logical sequence, while Tom provided a basic framework for voluntary membership protocols, and Rita fixed 2 more malfunctioning filing cabinets that had been frustrating. "Bureaucrats for years." "This is unprecedented," Vex announced, returning from its consultation. "My supervisor has never encountered a situation like this. She is consulting with her supervisor, who is consulting with the Department of Inexplicable Phenomena." "There's a Department of Inexplicable Phenomena?" Robert asked with interest. "That sounds like our kind of place." "It was created last month," Vex admitted. "Specifically to handle your case. The Emperor is displeased." David winced. "We're sorry to cause trouble. We really just want to establish friendly relations." "Friendly relations," Vex repeated, then began making the coffee machine. Noise again. "You continue to use concepts that do not exist in our bureaucratic framework." Amy looked up from helping another alien untangle its forms. "Maybe that's the real problem. Your framework doesn't account for species that want to cooperate instead of fight." "Because such species do not exist," Vex insisted. "We exist," Tom pointed out reasonably. "You are an anomaly," Vex declared. "Anomalies are processed through special procedures." "What kind of special procedures?" Robert asked, suddenly alert. Vex consulted a form that seemed to be written in fire. "According to Protocol 1247X, anomalies are to be studied, categorized, and then eliminated to maintain galactic stability." "Eliminated?" David asked carefully. "Nothing personal," Vex assured them. "It is simply more efficient than redesigning our entire governmental system to accommodate unprecedented situations." The humans exchanged glances. Rita closed the panel she had been working on and casually moved closer to the others. Tom folded up his measuring tape and slipped it into his pocket. Amy finished helping the seahorse telescope being and stepped back to rejoin the group. "Well," David said diplomatically, "that does sound like one approach, though it might be more expensive in the long run than just creating a few new forms." Vex's tentacles stopped shuffling paperwork entirely. "More expensive? Oh, sure," Tom said earnestly. "Elimination protocols probably require military resources, cleanup crews, documentation of the action, investigation into why the anomaly occurred in the first place. Lot of overhead costs. Whereas cooperation agreements are basically free," Amy added. "Just paperwork and maybe some administrative meetings." Vex began making a noise like a printer running out of ink. "Cost-benefit analysis is handled by the Department of Economic Efficiency. This is beyond my authority." "Could we speak with them?" David asked hopefully. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a different office that looked remarkably similar to the first one, facing a being that appeared to be made entirely of calculator displays. The nameplate read, "Director of Economic Efficiency Analysis." "Most irregular," the calculator being announced. "Most irregular indeed." 3 weeks had passed since the humans arrived, and the Galactic Dominion was discovering that having helpful visitors was far more disruptive than having hostile ones. David Reynolds found himself in what appeared to be a conference room designed by someone who had heard about angles but never actually seen one. The table curved in ways that hurt his brain, and the chairs seemed to exist in slightly different dimensions from each other. Across from him sat Director Kef of Resource Management. a being that looked like a tree made of silver wire with clusters of blue lights for leaves. The lights flickered constantly as Kef spoke, creating patterns that almost made sense if David didn't look directly at them. The efficiency improvements are causing systemic problems, Kef explained, its voice sounding like wind chimes in a thunderstorm. Your engineers' repairs to the filing systems in Sector 7 have increased processing speed by 340%. The downstream offices cannot handle the increased workload. That sounds like a good problem to have, David said reasonably. Higher. Efficiency means more gets done with less effort. Kef's lights flashed rapidly in what might have been distress. But we have protocols for inefficiency, quotas based on expected delays, performance metrics calibrated for systematic failures. When things work properly, the entire management structure becomes obsolete. Amy Foster looked up from the notes. She had been scribbling. Maybe the management structure needs updating. Most organizations adapt their methods when circumstances change. Adapt. Kef repeated the word like it was toxic. The Dominion does not adapt. The Dominion imposes its will upon reality until reality complies. How's that working out for you? Tom Brady asked curiously. Before Kef could answer, the door opened and Admiral Corvus stalked in, his scales showing stress patterns that Amy had learned to recognize. Behind him came a floating sphere of what looked like angry storm clouds, with lightning crackling inside. The humans must be stopped, Admiral Corvus announced without preamble. They are corrupting proper order throughout the fleet. The storm sphere rumbled agreement in a voice like distant thunder. The navigation. Corps reports 15% improvement in hyperspace efficiency after implementing human suggestions. This is unacceptable. Tom looked pleased. The route optimization algorithms worked then? I wasn't sure they would translate properly to your propulsion systems. They work too well, Admiral Corvus hissed. We are arriving at destinations, ahead of schedule. Our intimidation protocols depend on dramatic timing. When we appear precisely when expected, the psychological impact is reduced. You could intimidate people more efficiently, though, Robert Stone pointed out. Better scheduling means you can threaten more civilizations per day. The storm sphere crackled ominously. Efficiency is not the goal. Dominance is the goal. Amy finished writing something in her notebook and looked up. Are you sure those aren't the same thing? Dominance through superior efficiency seems more sustainable than dominance through brute force. Sustainable dominance, Admiral Corvus repeated slowly. This is not how conquest works. Rita Walsh chose that moment to stick her head through the door. Sorry to interrupt, but I finished looking at your energy distribution grid. Whoever designed it was either a genius or completely insane. Maybe both. Anyway, I've got some suggestions that could cut your power costs by about 60%. Director Kef's lights began flickering so rapidly that the room strobed like a disco. Power cost reduction of that magnitude would destabilize our entire economic model. Your economic model is based on high energy costs, David asked. That seems counterproductive. The Dominion controls energy production, Admiral Corvus explained stiffly. High costs ensure dependency and compliance from member species. Member species, Tom repeated. I thought they were conquered territories. They are conquered territories who are also member species, the storm sphere rumbled. The terminology is politically necessary. Amy blinked. So you conquered them, but you call them members to make it sound voluntary? Voluntary conquest, Admiral Corvus said. They volunteer to be conquered rather than face annihilation. That's not really voluntary, Robert observed. That's coercion with extra steps. The storm sphere began crackling more violently. You question the fundamental principles of Dominion governance? We're not questioning, David said diplomatically. We're just trying to understand. Your system seems unnecessarily complicated. Director Kef's lights stabilized into a pattern that might have been curiosity. How would your species handle territorial expansion? We'd probably start with trade agreements, Tom said thoughtfully. Mutual benefit arrangements, maybe some. Cultural exchange programs. Economic partnerships, Amy added. Scientific collaboration, shared exploration projects. Boring, Admiral Corvus declared. Where is the glory in trade agreements? Where is the fear and respect that comes from? Overwhelming military superiority? Well, Rita said, stepping fully into the room, respect is probably more useful than fear in the long run. Scared people look for ways to rebel. Respected partners look for ways to cooperate. The conference room fell silent, except for the storm sphere's continuous rumbling. Director Kef's lights dimmed to barely visible flickers. Admiral Corvus made the familiar steam radiator sound, but quieter this time, almost thoughtful. Cooperation, Director Kef said eventually. This would require completely new administrative frameworks. We could help with that, Amy offered, eagerly. Creating new systems is actually kind of fun. Fun, Admiral Corvus repeated faintly. Before anyone could respond, the door burst open again and Deputy Assistant Undersecretary Vex rushed in, all 8 tentacles flailing in apparent panic. Director Kef, Vex gasped. We have a situation in the compliance department. The humans helped 3 more species reorganize their territorial agreements into mutual cooperation pacts. The subjugation paperwork is becoming obsolete. Which species? The storm sphere demanded. The singing crystals, the methane breathers, and the collective consciousness of Trill, Vex reported. They are all requesting conversion from conquered territory status to voluntary partnership agreements. Admiral Corvus sat down heavily in a chair that immediately molded itself to his reptilian form. This is a disaster. If conquered territories start demanding partnership agreements, the entire structure of the Dominion will collapse. Would that necessarily be bad? David asked gently. Bad? Admiral Corvus's yellow eyes focused on David with laser intensity. The Dominion has maintained order in this galaxy for 3,000 years. Without our iron fist, chaos would reign. Species would war against each other endlessly. But they're not warring against each other now, Tom pointed out. They're all part of your Dominion. Exactly, Admiral Corvus said triumphantly, because we conquered them and imposed peace. So you've proven that different species can coexist peacefully when they're part of the same governmental structure, Amy said slowly. What if they could do that without being conquered first? Admiral Corvus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again, then made a sound like air being slowly released from a balloon. Director Kef's lights began cycling through colors that David was fairly certain didn't exist in human visual spectrum. The economic implications alone could be enormous, Rita finished. Think about it. All the resources you spend on conquest fleets, occupation forces, rebellion suppression, you could redirect all of that toward actually useful things. Like what? The storm sphere rumbled skeptically. Infrastructure, Tom suggested. Scientific research, exploration, cultural exchange programs, art, Amy added, music, literature, all the things that make civilization worth having. The room fell silent again. Director Kef's lights had settled into a slow, steady pulse. Admiral Corvus was staring at the curved table as if it might contain answers to questions he had never thought to ask. The storm sphere's lightning had reduced to occasional flickers. This conversation never happened, Admiral Corvus said finally. Of course, David agreed. Though if you ever want to continue it, we're happy to discuss alternatives. Alternatives, Admiral Corvus repeated, then stood and walked toward the door. Hypothetical alternatives, for academic purposes only. Academic purposes, Amy said, with a barely suppressed smile. We love academic purposes. After the Admiral and Storm Sphere left, Director Kef remained, its lights pulsing thoughtfully. These hypothetical alternatives, it said carefully, Would they require extensive administrative restructuring? Probably, David admitted, but we could help with that too. Help, Director Kef mused. Such a strange concept, yet somehow it seems to work. The storage bay that had become the unofficial Earth liaison office buzzed with activity that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. David Reynolds sat at a desk made from salvaged Dominion furniture, reviewing reports that still made his head spin. Around him, his crew had somehow transformed a forgotten corner of the galaxy's most feared empire into something that looked suspiciously like a small-town city hall. Amy Foster had claimed one entire wall for her xenobiology charts, which now included detailed friendship maps showing which species got along best with which others. Her latest project involved organizing the first-ever Galactic Academic Conference, and she was currently arguing with a being made of crystallized mathematics about proper footnote formatting for interdimensional research papers. No, Amy was saying patiently. You can't just reference the obvious implications of recursive probability cascades without citing your sources. Other species might not find it obvious. The math crystal flickered in what might have been embarrassment. But the mathematical relationships are self-evident to any intelligence above Class 7. That's exactly why you need citations, Amy explained. Not everyone thinks in pure mathematics. Some of us need the steps spelled out. Across the room, Tom Brady was hunched over navigation charts with 3 Dominion officers who looked like they were having the time of their lives. What had started as an efficiency consultation had evolved into a complete redesign of hyperspace traffic patterns for the entire sector. See, if we adjust the approach vector by just 2 degrees, Tom was explaining to a being that resembled a mechanical flower, we can reduce transit time by 18% and eliminate the bottleneck at the nebular junction. Brilliant, the flower being chimed, its petals rustling with excitement. But what about the ceremonial approach protocols? Military formations are supposed to inspire awe and terror. They can still do that, Robert Stone chimed in from his corner, where he was teaching Dominion security forces about community policing techniques. Just more efficiently. Awe and terror don't have to be wasteful. Rita Walsh had somehow acquired her own workshop in the depths of the station, where she was training Dominion engineers in what she called basic maintenance philosophy. The waiting list for her courses now stretched across 4 solar systems, and she had started charging consultation fees that she donated to a fund for upgrading outdated infrastructure throughout the empire. The secret, Rita was explaining to a group of technicians who hung on her every word, is preventive maintenance. Don't wait for things to break. Take care of them before they have problems. One of the technicians, a blob-like creature with dozens of tool appendages, raised what might have been a hand. But if we prevent all breakdowns, what will we do with our time? Build new things, Rita said simply. Improve existing systems. Innovate. Create. The concept of innovation was still causing philosophical crises throughout the Dominion bureaucracy. David had received 17 formal requests for clarification on the proper protocols for unprecedented improvement initiatives in the past week alone. A soft chime announced an incoming visitor, and David looked up to see Emperor Thrax himself, materializing in the doorway. The crystalline ruler had taken to dropping by unannounced, usually with questions that started with, hypothetically speaking, and ended with David feeling like he was accidentally dismantling a galactic government. One conversation at a time. David Reynolds, Emperor Thrax said, his form shifting into something roughly humanoid, but still composed entirely of living light. I require consultation. Of course, Your Majesty, David said, gesturing to a chair that immediately adjusted itself to accommodate the Emperor's shifting form. What can I help you with? The efficiency improvements continue to spread, Emperor Thrax said, without preamble. 17 sectors have reported productivity increases of over 200%. The Compliance Department is processing voluntary cooperation agreements faster than our legal framework can accommodate them. That sounds like good news, David said carefully. It is catastrophic, Emperor Thrax declared, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely displeased. The fundamental structure of the Dominion was built on controlled inefficiency and managed dissatisfaction. When subjects are content and productive, they have no need for imperial oversight. Amy looked up from her charts. Is imperial oversight actually necessary? I mean, if everyone's getting along and being productive, Emperor Thrax's form flickered rapidly between different geometric configurations. This is the question that haunts my processing cycles. For 3 millennia, I have maintained order through strength and fear. Now I discover that cooperation and efficiency may be more effective. Change can be scary, David acknowledged, but it doesn't have to be destructive. You could evolve from an empire to something more like a federation. Federation, Emperor Thrax repeated slowly. Voluntary association of independent but cooperative entities. Exactly, Tom said, looking up from his navigation charts. Same benefits, less overhead, happier participants. But what would I be? Emperor Thrax asked, and for the first time since David had met him, the galactic ruler sounded uncertain. If I am not an emperor ruling through conquest, what am I? A president, Amy suggested. A coordinator, a facilitator. Those are not very impressive titles, Emperor Thrax admitted. They don't have to be impressive, Robert said gently. They just have to be useful. The Emperor sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, his form cycling through various crystalline patterns. Finally, he spoke again. Admiral Corvus has submitted a proposal for reorganizing the military fleets into exploration and assistance squadrons. That's wonderful, David said, meaning it. Exploration is much more interesting than conquest anyway. He also wishes to retain some of the ceremonial aspects of military tradition, Emperor Thrax continued. Apparently, impressive formations and dramatic lighting effects can be used for celebration as easily as intimidation. Even better, Amy said enthusiastically. Parties are way more fun than invasions. Parties, Emperor Thrax mused. The spiral dancers mentioned something about parties during their cultural orientation session. They expressed enthusiasm for the concept. Before David could respond, Deputy Assistant Undersecretary Vex burst through the doorway, all 8, tentacles waving frantically. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The humans have created a problem. Emperor Thrax's form stabilized into an attentive configuration. What manner of problem? They have solved the Cathani territorial dispute, Vex announced breathlessly. The conflict that has raged for 400 years. They resolved it in 17 minutes using something called mediation techniques. David winced. Was that bad? The Cathani seemed very stressed about their border issues. It was unprecedented, Vex declared. The Cathani are now requesting to formalize their peace agreement and establish joint colonies. They want to share resources and technologies. That sounds positive, Tom observed. It is completely outside our administrative framework, Vex wailed. We have no forms for voluntary resource sharing between former enemies, no protocols for joint colonization projects, no procedures for friendship. Emperor Thrax began making a sound like crystal wind chimes being played by a hurricane. Friendship. Yes, this appears to be the human's most dangerous capability. We're not trying to be dangerous, David protested. No, Emperor Thrax agreed, which makes you more dangerous still. Enemies can be fought, rebels can be suppressed, but friends... He trailed off, his form shifting through configurations that seemed to express concepts David didn't have words for. Friends change everything, Amy finished softly. Indeed, Emperor Thrax said. They change everything. Rita wandered over, wiping her hands on a rag that somehow cleaned itself. Change isn't necessarily bad, though. Sometimes old systems stop working and you need to build new ones. New systems, Emperor Thrax repeated. Built on cooperation rather than domination. Built on mutual benefit, David added. On voluntary participation and shared goals. On friendship, Tom concluded with a grin. Emperor Thrax sat quietly, for a long moment, his crystalline form pulsing with slow, steady light. Finally, he stood and moved toward the door. I must convene the Council of Species, he announced. It appears we have a government to rebuild. Need any help? Amy called. After him. Emperor Thrax paused in the doorway, his form brightening considerably. I believe, Dr. Foster, that we will need all the help we can get. After he left, David looked around at his team, all of whom were grinning with barely contained excitement. Well, he said finally, I guess we're in the nation-building business now. Federation building, Tom corrected. Much more fun than nation-building. And much more paperwork, Robert added with a laugh. Good thing we're experienced with paperwork, David said, reaching for the stack of forms on his desk. The top one was titled Application to Request Permission to File a Formal Application for Establishing Permanent Diplomatic Relations between the Galactic Federation, formerly the Galactic Dominion, and the planet Earth. Progress, Amy observed, cheerfully. Slow, bureaucratic, incredibly complicated progress. David picked up his pen and started filling out forms that would reshape the political structure of an entire galaxy. Outside the viewport, Dominion ships were already being retrofitted with exploration equipment instead of weapon systems. And somewhere in the vast station, several hundred species were learning that cooperation was not only possible, but actually quite pleasant. It wasn't the mission they had planned, but somehow it felt exactly right.